Namaste. We are here today to interview Neil Dalal ji, the director of the Gurukulam documentary. So let's go ahead and start the interview. Hariḥ Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hariḥ Om. I'd just like to start off with a couple of questions. What inspired you to go ahead and make such a documentary?
Oh, it's a good question. It's a big question. So Jillian and I, we've known Swamiji for many years, and we realized that there's been nothing about the tradition that's been documented visually. And we have so much of Pujya Swamiji's writings and videos, but there's nothing that's really captured the tradition. And so we thought it'd be great to do that. And secondly, from an academic perspective related to that, I'm a textualist and a Sanskritist, and my time is mostly spent in Shankara Bhashyam and the other commentaries. And I realized that my experience in the tradition, in doing field work in India, was very different than the research I was consuming and producing. And it seemed very flat compared to my actual experience. And so I wanted to step into doing an ethnographic type of study and give that experience to viewers, because there's this richness to the tradition. Just stepping into the space of the Gurukulam, you step into sacred space, and everything shifts, and your dress and your actions and your internal space shifts with that. So I wanted to try and give people a flavor of that and see the tradition in that context, and I think there's something important about that.
I see, wonderful. And so some of the distinguishing elements of the film or the documentary are that it does not have a soundtrack, and it takes in the ambient atmosphere and gives you a very good projection of being at the Gurukulam itself, so you feel really immersed. So what was this your plan to begin with, or is this something you decided post-production?
We wanted that from the beginning, and that's partly we hired a cinematographer who's an old friend of Jillian, actually, and he is an anthropologist at Northwestern now, and he was at Harvard at the time, and he does something called sensory ethnography. His name is J.P. Snydecki. Okay. And so we were really taken by his films and watching them prior, and we thought, oh, there's some spirit that's being captured in this style that's very different. And the reason for that, one reason, is that most documentaries have narration and composed music, and they're meant to explain what everything is to the viewer. So the viewer comes out and chunks information down. You're told, usually by a white man voice, what's going on in this other culture. And it's this mediating lens, constructing your experience. And so we wanted hyper-realism, a verite experience where it was actually like you're traveling to the ashram. We wanted to give the viewer the experience of actually going there. And when you go to Anaikatti, you don't have people telling you, you don't have an orientation where they tell you exactly what to do, especially for like American people going there who don't have a exposure to the tradition, Hindu practices in general and etiquette. So you have to confront that. I mean, you go there and you have to learn on the fly, and we want to capture that in the film.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And so you of course know a lot about filmmaking, and your background is also very diverse. And we spoke earlier about how you've been a student of Pujya Swamiji since '98, and you also studied psychology. So could you tell us a little bit more about your background and how elements of this stitched in with your view of filmmaking as well?
Well, this background-wise, as I was mentioning before, I met Swamiji in '97. I had been studying in California with the California Institute for Integral Studies with one of Pujya Swamiji's old disciples named Carol Whitfield, or she goes by Radha more often. And I met Swamiji, and I had amazing opportunities early on. In 1998, he invited me to come to India with him, and I spent 3 months just traveling with him. And it was just amazing opportunity because I was still young in my Vedanta study, and I got to be in the car with him, hang out in the hotels with him,
Really?
fly in the planes with him, and I just would constantly pepper him with questions. I was probably a little bit annoying, but he I think he enjoyed. But so because I was just full of asking him psychological, philosophical, historical questions, just trying to understand as much as I could, and because I understood this opportunity, but more importantly, I got to know Swamiji really closely personally, and I think in terms of my understanding of Vedanta, that's been just as important as anything else, is seeing him as this amazing example of wisdom in practice.
Yes.
And so that in part is what I kept coming back to, and was like, there's something about being with the acharyas, and not just hearing their voice, but actually being with them and having that guru-shishya relationship where you learn in all kinds of other ways that are hard to articulate. And so that was part of it, to try and capture that.
Okay.
Into the screen.
And so, how did you approach Pujya Swāmiji, for permission for filming? Did you just say that, hey, here's a documentary you want to produce on life at the Gurukulam?
Yeah, well, there was some interest at first in the Gurukulam, but then when they realized how, Swamiji was like, sure,
Okay.
we could do it, but then it's also an expensive endeavor. So he's like, okay, you make this your project, make it an academic project, and get academic funding, and do it, and I because what I was also telling him is that the academic world sees Vedanta in a very kind of reduced, reified way.
Yeah.
Because if you just study textually and you're only looking from the absolute perspective, this Paramarthika perspective, a lot of, especially academics who are familiar with Vedanta but may not specialize in Vedanta, they may think, well, where's Ishvara?
Yes.
Where's ritual? Where are these things? Because you can read Vedanta as being a non-ritual tradition, or potentially Nirish Ishvara, agnostic in some way. And I thought, but that's not my experience. Right? My experience, especially in the Arsha Vidya Parampara, is that Ishvara's order pervades. There's a ritual life that pervades this whole way of being. And so I talked to Swamiji about that, and talked to him about how there's very few resources for academics. Certainly no visual or documentary resources, and students want to learn that way now, and so he understood that this could be a powerful tool to bring Vedanta, a new vision of Vedanta, into the academic world.
It's brilliant, actually, and in my experience as well, I'm very grateful that it's an insider's view of the Gurukulam as opposed to an outsider's lens, because that appears very cold and detached and otherworldly, and here you actually felt immersed into the environment, especially when the filmmakers yourselves knew what exactly you were doing and what is the crux of the teaching. So you could certainly see that in the documentary itself manifesting. So very appreciative. The first shot of the film, it's a nice long tracking shot, and there's this gentleman with a blue color towel, and it's got a nice yellowish tinge in the background. It's a tracking shot. So what are some of your inspirations for filmmaking and directing?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to Jillian as the director, and we're co-directors. But she's a professional filmmaker. She studied at NYU and has made multiple films. And so she's a cinematographer by training.
Okay.
So she had a lot. I learned a lot going through it. I was thinking more about the structure of the film and understanding what's important.
Yeah.
And how to move through that space, and what are we looking for, and things like that. And JP came along and also brought a lot of really wonderful cinematography techniques.
Okay.
So what you point out, these long takes, these long shots, that we purposely wanted to incorporate that as a way of settling into a space.
Yes.
And media these days is constructed on this hyper fast editing style, quick cuts, and we're so conditioned to that, and it's almost overstimulating, and it sort of compresses time and does strange things. And my experience at the ashram was and my study academic, what I focus on is nididhyasana. That's sort of my special topic, and so I'm fascinated by this contemplative ethos, this contemplative environment, and that was my experience. I lived in the ashrams for 3 years, and that was part of my experience.
Did you do the course?
And Pujya Swamiji set up a course for me in between 2 courses.
Okay.
So I basically did a 3-year course, and when I came back in 2002, he asked me to teach traditionally, but I didn't go through a cohort of the 3-year course.
Okay.
So that was good and bad. It was really interesting because I had a lot of one-on-one teaching. A lot of my technical knowledge, I give a lot of credit to Swami Brahma Prakashananda, who's running the Nagpur Gurukulam now, because she kind of took me on and one-on-one, or just with a few other students, taught me Panini and how to read Bhasha.
I see.
So that was a huge skill to take out.
And prior to that, did you have much experience with Sanskrit?
Yeah, I had 2 years of Sanskrit in California before going, and then continued there. So.
Very nice.
So yeah, I forget what I was saying. But so the long take. So what we wanted to do was give this sense of realism without this mediating filter that makes, because what happens when you have a narrator, one thing is you have the other.
Yes.
Suddenly there's 2 poles. You have the viewer and this sort of what we call the anthropological other.
Okay.
And automatically you get in the problem of Orientalism and exoticism, and you can't step into it. And then the long takes and the style of filming, the sort of really intimate observational style, is to build up the particularities of experience.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like cultivating a mindfulness to the sensory experience of being there, and the sounds and all that stuff. And that we wanted people to slow down. So instead of film where you want stimulation and visual speed, we wanted people to settle and get in this frame of the film, get the adhikara, this qualification and this kind of samatvam, other qualities of adhikara in a simulated way as much as you can, in order to be able to sit in the teachings. Yeah. So as the film progresses, the teachings become more and more deeper, but it's premised on this earlier part of sort of getting into that contemplative space.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And one of the other key features I noticed was clearly you were there with a lot of equipment. You were following these people, and yet none of them felt conscious, as though like they were actually being filmed. It seemed very natural. They went about their day-to-day affairs. So is that something that you had to instruct the people, or did it just occur naturally?
Yeah, well, both. First, we didn't film at all the first 2 or 3 weeks we were there.
Okay.
We just observed, and we were participating, sitting in the classes, getting to know people. I mean, a lot of people I already knew, having been there multiple times in the past, and having lived there. But and then Swamiji actually introduced us to everyone, and we gave some instruction. Pretend like we're not there. Yeah. But of course you can't pretend like a camera's not there. But after weeks and weeks, when the camera just keeps moving around, and, people start to forget, or you find people who feel more comfortable and okay with it. So yeah.
I see. And how long did production last? How many days?
We were in the Gurukulam for I think 10 or 11 weeks.
Okay.
And we had a very small crew, so it was just Jillian and I and JP. We had a sound guy there for a little while who had to leave. So just the 3 of us, and usually filming it just be maybe 2 of us. Yeah. So it's a and we're using a small handheld camera and just one boom. So
what is a boom?
A boom, like for the sound.
Okay.
A big mic.
Okay.
So I was doing the sound and mixing the levels and stuff, but. With just 2 people, it's a very small footprint. Yeah. So you're not. If you have a big crew, then it makes people, more self-conscious.
Yes. And how did you decide on the various locations? Because I know you've shot scenes by Pujya Swamiji's teaching, the guided meditation portions of it. Even an interesting piece where Surya Tahuraji, he's going and picking up his wife from the airport. I love that scene because it was such a contrast to the rest of the film. Right. And that's what very noisily, it was bustling, it was dark, and there were like people sculling all over. Right. And then you return back to the serene Gurukulam environment, and I don't know, you feel suddenly at peace along with the pacing of the film. So, my compliments on that.
No, that's great. So that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted that experience of experiencing India.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of more typical India, and then coming back into the Gurukulam experience. So, yeah, we were there, and you started shooting everything, and we had over 200 hours of footage.
Okay.
That you then reduced into this 108-minute piece, and first when we went in, there's a lot of pressure and anxiety.
Yeah.
We have a certain amount of time. We don't have enough money to come back, and so you're trying to force stuff. But once we settled in, we allowed the film to come to us.
Yes.
And a lot of that was just stepping into the space, and maybe easier for me sometimes than than Jillian and JP, who weren't as familiar, right? And seeing what's important for the people, what's this insider perspective, and how is the whole Gurukulam working together?
Yeah.
Because one thing we forget, we're very focused on Swamiji oftentimes, but we also focus on the workers.
Yes.
And this whole web of how a portrait of the whole place and how it's all working. So, filmmaking is very intuitive. It's really an art, and it's being an artist. It's sort of constantly moving, and we also had people calling us when something happened. So yeah, it's a very organic process where you're just constantly looking and searching and finding the right times and the right light, and dealing with technical issues, and taking opportunities when they come. So Surya and Nima are dear old friends of mine.
Okay.
I've known them for many years. Actually, Nima, her father and my father were childhood friends. So this in Villa Parla in Bombay.
Okay. We're from Bombay as well.
So where in Bombay?
Malabar.
Okay. So we had sort of an old connection, and so we knew Nima was coming, and we wanted to get a mix of perspectives of new students and old students, of sannyasins, and they're very interesting because they're old. I think Nima's been studying since the 80s, Surya since the mid-90s, and so they're senior students and they're teaching, but they're grahastas, and so they're doing something new. So we were quite intrigued by what they're doing and how they view the tradition.
And what were some of the challenges that you faced while filmmaking?
So many challenges. I came in honestly a bit naive. Jillian was telling me this is going to be really hard, and I knew it would be hard, but it was harder than we thought. First of all, just technically it's difficult because you're bringing in all this equipment, and you can't make a mistake with your equipment because there's nowhere to go. And various issues technical issues like lighting, sound, so for example, plugging into the sound of Swamiji's microphone in the lecture hall, all kinds of issues, and how you deal with your hard drives. There's that sort of stuff. But also, I think it's unlike social issue documentaries where people want to speak because they have a reason, we're stepping into a sacred contemplative space.
Yeah.
And there's most people don't want to speak for the tradition because they're not swamis.
Yes.
They're not teachers, and they're very aware of how little they know, and they don't want to represent. And so it took a while sometimes to draw people out, let them get comfortable, and then editing the film was a great challenge too.
Okay.
And I was talking to a well-known scholar of Advaita prior to making the film. I was like, I'm thinking of making this film. He sort of was like, that's impossible. How can you capture Advaita visually?
Yeah.
And so that was our biggest challenge. How do you capture this tradition?
Yes.
And then how do you weave teachings in? And with the visual, with the teachings, because for most people who are not exposed to Swamiji or some other acharyas, they don't want to have a film experience of just sitting in a lecture hall, right? So it was a great effort. The editing was a huge process. And in fact, the editing took us almost a year to do.
I'm sure with you so many wonderful shots, it's hard to pick like what you want to put in the final presentation. It's very difficult because I saw some of your additional footage as well, the bonus footage, the interview with Pujya Swāmiji and going to his old school. So were some of these locations like chosen by you for the purpose of filmmaking, or did it just occur naturally and you followed through?
Well, see, when we went in, we have no script, right? So unlike some films where you script it all out and you have an idea, we went in with, we had ideas, but we didn't know what we were going to find, who we were going to meet, where we were going to go. And Swamiji is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Right? His schedule can shift in a drop of a hat, and his, you know, his energy, despite his age and his health issues at the time, his energy was amazing. I mean, he doesn't stop.
Yes.
And he doesn't wait for you. So yeah, we had no script, and so we just shot everything that we encountered that we thought could be possible. And so, you know, when Swamiji was going on a trip, and he invited us, and we said, "Oh, wonderful," you know, and so we just jumped
so
in,
it was
jumped in
absolutely
the car.
unscripted. There was nothing.
No, nothing scripted. Nothing.
Okay.
And we never knew what was going to happen. You don't know the weather. You don't know who's going to come in or who's going to leave, and so
Yeah.
it was, or something crazy is going to happen, like elephants coming in. You know,
Putting the garland around,
Yeah.
Pujya
Right,
Swāmiji was
right.
very cute.
Right. So yeah, so you don't know. You know, at the Tanjavur temple, we didn't know there was going to be a gathering
Yeah.
to greet him. You know, we get out of the car and go, oh, we gotta capture this, and so it's a style we call run and gun.
Okay.
You know, so you're on call 24 hours a day. You know, sometimes 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, we'd hear something, or someone would text us something. We'd run out and try and film.
So almost like a mix of reporting and filmmaking.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So, and one thing I noticed in the documentary was Pujya Swāmiji is treated somewhat of a superhero. Wherever he goes, there are like people greeting him and garlanding him and red carpet treatment. So, how was that like? You know, is he super well known in that area?
I think in general in Tamil Nadu he's quite well known,
Okay.
and highly respected. You know, Swamiji he's interesting because he knows how good of a teacher he is, but he's amazingly humble. And there's virtually no marketing or branding. Like, it's all word of mouth. It's not like some of the other really, super big, spiritual teachers in
True.
India. He keeps a relatively low profile, but he's hugely respected. I think it's partly because he's so traditional.
Yes.
And he's maintaining the tradition the way he sees fit, and he wants to maintain this level of excellence for his students, to continue the tradition and not have it kind of washed out and diluted.
Yes.
And that doesn't lead to marketability in the way that some other teachers do. So he was well known. I've been with Swamiji in like Chennai, for example, where there's just 7, 8, 10,000 people, red carpet kind of thing.
Okay.
We just didn't end up with him in those situations. He didn't go. He was mostly in the Gurukulam, and he didn't do much big travel. So what I loved was these intimate moments. Like, there's a scene where he goes to a children's school.
Yes.
And I love that Swamiji, because he could just be doing massive lecture halls, and we did shoot some of those scenes, which didn't get into the film. But the way he connected with those kids, I thought, and his teaching was so profound. I remember sitting there going, oh, this is profound on multiple levels. It's a 6-year-old or a 60-year-old. It doesn't matter. And so yeah, he's a superstar, but he doesn't care.
Yeah, there's absolutely no show or pomp, and he is the traditional teacher of Vedanta that he sets himself to be. And the other thing is, as you mentioned, how well he connects with people. It doesn't matter what your age is, what your background is. To him, every single person is important,
Right.
and everybody feels special. And one of the things I've noticed while sitting in his talks, he makes eye contact with everybody, and everybody feels that he smiled at me, and
Exactly.
he said hello to me, and it was me. But then everybody else is feeling the same way too. So it's beautiful. His ability to make a person feel special is unmatched.
It is, and I've spent a lot of time talking to Swamiji about teaching and
Yeah.
his teaching techniques, and it is all, you know, he spent a lifetime really trying to become a better teacher, and he doesn't stop. So it's really amazing that he's never stagnated as a teacher, and he talks about it as always being fresh. And so this is one of the big reasons I want to do the film, and something I'm talking about now academically is my earlier research. I've done a lot of work on Shabda Pramana,
Okay.
and testimony, and why it's important, and sort of these misconstructions and misunderstandings of Advaita in terms of the role of Shabda. And when we think about this, we, you know, in the tradition, we reduce it to certain kind of particular methods, and like negative language in 1880,
Yeah.
and Lakshana, and Adhyaropa, and Upavada, and these sorts of things. And to me, these are the pillars. These are sort of the architecture of how Shabda Pramana works.
True.
And Swamiji is, of course, well aware of that. He knows that inside out. But the actual experience, when it's fleshed out in the living hearing of, because we say texts, but it's an oral
Yes.
tradition, right? And so that teaching, when it comes orally, is so rich. And the ways he uses eye contact, the ways he uses humor, the ways he layers his teachings for various levels of students, and there's all kinds of stuff. And I can go back to lectures I heard years ago, and I go back and I realize, oh, there's multiple layers here. And he's bringing in very, very technical things with only the advanced students potentially knowing it.
Yeah.
And he's you know, performer in a way to allow the words to penetrate. And so this is something that's you know, in academia and in anthropology, there's a whole realm what's called performance theory. And when I say performance, I don't mean to devalue it as just a performance, but as the richness and texture of how people communicate. And so that was one thing I wanted to bring out in the film, is that Shabda Pramana is, for Pramana to become Pramana, of course you need the receptivity of the listener.
Yes.
But the teacher has to enliven the text in a way that connects.
Yeah.
And that's the bridge, you know. So that was.
So on the same topic, everybody who's coming to the Gurukulam as a Bifnadikatva, they are all, you know, differently abled in their qualifications. So how does Pujya Swāmiji create a teaching that is so intimate to each one of them and that connects to all of them? So is there a particular method that he uses?
I don't know. I mean, that's sort of the magic of him as a teacher, and I think all of us teaching want to somehow recreate and capture that magic in our own idiosyncratic ways. You know, you can't puppet Swamiji. It doesn't come out right, and you have to find your own way to do that. But I want to put it as something like he holds space. He has a presence.
Yeah.
It's almost like his in some way he's holding everyone in an embrace, sort of into a knowledge embrace of some sort.
Yes.
And I don't know how he does it. You know, I mean, you can't reduce it.
Yeah.
And that's why film it was a good medium, because I don't want to reduce it.
Yes.
I don't want to say, well, you know, he's employing Lakshana here or Neti there, and look, he used humor or he used a pregnant silent pause, or, you know, I can try and analyze these, and there's this whole area called perlocutionary speech acts,
Okay.
which tries to, you know, the whole philosophy of speech acts and how we can analyze this. But once you do that, you lose the experience.
True.
Right? So there's something important in doing that, but the experience of that, it speaks for itself. So,
Yes.
so that's why film is this ideal medium to bring it out. So.
I see. Wonderful.
But the thing is too is that I think people who are exposed to Swamiji, if they can read his books, which are generally kind of edited, transcribed lectures, and they can watch videos. You know, you can go to Sailorsburg or somewhere and get all these video series. And I think in there, for them, because they have this experience, it sort of can the pramana opens up again.
Yes.
But if you haven't been in his actual presence in the classroom, sometimes reading it or those lectures can fall a little flat for some
True.
people who aren't exposed. And when I started to think about that, I realized that that's the richness being in his presence and being in sacred space and being surrounded by people and even sound. So that was one thing in the film. It's not just Swamiji, Mike. We're trying to bring in ambient sound and changing the sound perspectives, and there's something cumulative, this sort of communal effervescence that bubbles up in that process. And I think there's something about pramana that happens either if you're in person or in the classroom.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen once there's a screen, generally the normal screen or the normal book between you. So.
True. The pramana has to operate through medium.
Right.
This film was a beautiful way to capture it.
Thank you.
And even when I, to quote what you just mentioned about reading the book versus listening to his talks and being in his presence, that's what I always recommend to students of Vedanta, that, first start with the talks. You'll get a sense of, the places where he pauses, the places where he's intoning certain words, where he's placing emphasis on an idea. And then when you read the book again, you can hear it in his voice
Right.
when you're reading it. And that really works.
Right. It's a big difference in reading, because now you're hearing,
Yes.
you're not reading. Right?
And it's in his voice, not your inner
Right.
voice.
Right. So then it becomes Shravana rather
Right.
than just reading. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have any
Yeah.
questions?
Since you have already worked into academia, how do you see the Guru Shishya tradition? Because that's the most rich thing in our parampara. So while during the film you captured it well, so how do you think it's so important to have a Guru Shishya parampara in the field of academia to transact?
You mean like a traditional?
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends what you're doing and what your area of study is. For me, it's sort of to open up a can of worms, because there's a lot of theoretical debates about what background do you need and what kind of perspective do you need. I'm of the opinion that in my experience, I feel like having an insider perspective brings this whole richness to my study. So, and not always in obvious ways. And it's not to say that someone who doesn't have that experience can't do good academic work, depending on their topic. Certainly, for dealing with anthropology or ethnography, I feel it's really, really important. But yeah, it's tough. It's hard to say you need it, but I think it enriches the study. So.
Right. And what were some of your personal interactions with Pujya Swamiji off camera?
Any time with him is precious. But it was just wonderful just to have dinner with him sometimes, or being in the car with him, especially because when I was younger, I had spent a lot of time driving with him, so it sort of was nostalgic sense, and there's just always something to learn. I feel I was like a sponge around Swamiji, and just enjoying his presence. And he's just funny. He's always fun. Even if he doesn't need to talk about Vedanta, he can communicate with people just because he loves he loved people, and so because of his health, he was more limited. At this point, because he wasn't taking walks, and he's mostly in his kutia, and then going to class or occasionally going somewhere else. But just getting to talk to him one-on-one, discussing our family and things like that. So. And my whole family, my parents are also into Vedanta, so my parents also know Swamiji, and so it's very sweet. When I think back to Swamiji outside of Vedanta, there's just this kind of sweet feeling of he was like a grandfather. So that's how I feel.
So he's deeply missed by all his devotees around the world.
Yeah.
Magnanimous presence wherever he went. And talking about the film, when are you releasing it? And can you tell us a bit more about that process?
Yeah, so we've had a few screenings. We screened it. We premiered it at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and then we screened it in Canada in Edmonton, and in August at the Rubin Museum of Art in New York, which is a really wonderful place. And now we're going to be releasing it in I think April.
Okay.
And we're going to have a small theatrical release, probably 4 to 6 cities. We're thinking. We're still in the process.
North America.
North America.
Okay.
Yeah. India is a little harder. We have to figure out. And we're going to release a DVD at the same time.
Okay.
We will be releasing it both hard copy and on video on demand.
Okay.
So eventually in India as well, or anywhere.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll be we're probably in LA and San Francisco and maybe New York again, and a couple other cities will be
I see.
screening it. So, and then I'm going to be doing some university tours
Ah.
and showing the film at different universities, because the film is sort of straddling academia and a non-academic
True.
community. That's partly why I wanted to make the film, was for both. It's sort of a tight line to walk, but I think it's an amazing resource for scholars to use for
Yeah.
students. Because
And-
there's nothing on Hinduism.
True.
There's very few documentaries, and most documentaries that come out, not to be overly critical, but I find them to be a little too exoticist, a little too, playing to the trope of kind of wild, chaotic, exotic India,
Yeah.
Kumbh Mela type film, which is important, but it's just not my experience.
Yeah.
So I wanted to present it different.
I did my final year of high school over here in the US, and I know that a lot of people, teachers, students, they have what I call the Temple of Doom syndrome, and that is their view of India. It's all about cows, caste, curry, and it's a very backward view that they have. And I think this documentary that you've produced gives a deeper insight into the spiritual world, the culture, the rituals, and just the day-to-day living of a sadhaka at the Gurukulam. To my knowledge, I don't think this has ever been done before, like this kind of filmmaking. It's
Not
revolutionary.
in India. I mean, there's some old films by like Robert Gardner, who was at Harvard. There have been some good filmmakers, but no, there's nothing like when I look, when I teach an intro to Hinduism course and I'm looking for films, I don't know what to use, or if I use something, I have to spend a part of the class critiquing it and deconstructing it can be useful as a critique.
Yeah.
But I wanted something that gives lived experience, the living tradition.
True.
So,
And where do you teach?
University of Alberta,
Okay.
in Canada, in
Right.
Edmonton.
So did you preview the film in class with your students?
I have
Okay.
a couple times.
What was the reaction like? Were people
They enjoyed it.
fascinated?
They
Did
enjoyed
they
it.
think of India as different from what they saw? Or?
Well, it's hard to say because I've already been teaching them for a while before I show the
Okay.
film, so I try and make sure to break a lot of problematic instructions.
Yeah.
And one of my early things is to critique the very idea of exotic India.
Okay.
Or whether or the way that we construct and reify India, well, Hinduism in particular, like cows, curry, caste, and why this is so reductive and premised on a lot of problems,
Yeah.
namely racism of sorts. I hope that I've taught them enough that by the time they screen it, their views have
Right.
changed. But they've really appreciated this sense of stepping in.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're always reading text, and maybe they have pictures and slideshows or whatever. But the length of the film is in part to force or allow people to cultivate a different state.
Yeah.
And to allow us to be in that presence and be empathetic without being apologetic. We're not being eulogistic, and Swamiji didn't want that. He didn't want something about him. He was very clear. He's like, I don't. He didn't want something that's just like how wonderful Swamiji is. But I think his brilliance as a teacher comes through
Yeah.
the film. But so yeah, it was really just the students really appreciate. It's like traveling to India.
Yes, yes. That's what we felt
Yeah.
because we've been to the Sailorsburg ashram several times, never to Anaikatti, and this transported me there. So it was a brilliant piece of filmmaking and from a student of Pujya Swamiji himself, so nobody asked for. So So thank you so much, and I look forward to getting to know you better.
Yeah, definitely.
And what are your future projects?
Well, I'm writing a book, and I'm trying to hopefully complete that in the next year.
Okay.
And this is my focus is on nididhyasana, because there's been work on shravana, but there's no academic work on nididhyasana, and there's a lot of interesting issues in the history of what exactly nididhyasana is. So that's my main work right now. Is I want to look at how philosophy comes into practice as a troublesome word, but comes into living.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking into various things like some more cognitive studies of memory,
Okay.
and how memory comes into contemplative practice. So I have some other projects. And
Nice.
I work a little bit on ethics, so animal ethics and environmental ethics.
Yeah.
And, maybe some more work on living Vedanta traditions.
Okay. So could you give us a website or source where people can get to know you and your work better?
I have a very poor website presence.
Maybe you should
I should
work
learn
on that
from
now.
you, yeah. No, I have to put a website together. It's in my plans. It is. We have a baby, just 8 weeks old, and a 3-year-old.
Congratulations!
So our time has been on making the film, and I have a full-time job outside of film, teaching and stuff. So
hard to manage.
so I have it on my list of things to do. So now at the University of Alberta, there's some information on me in the philosophy department and the studies program, and on the film website, gurukulamfilm.com. There's a little bit, but no, I haven't actually posted publications and things like that.
I see.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you once again, and see you sometime soon.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Om Purnamadaಃ Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamādāya Purnamevāvashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hariḥ Om.